Hi, I'm Gigi and I'm an economist at the Reserve Bank of Australia. This video draws on concepts from our explainer on unemployment, its measurement and types, which you can find on the education section of the RBA's website. In this video, we're going to talk about the labour market and unemployment and link some concepts around this topic to current issues or things that are happening in the Australian economy right now. But first, let's talk about the labour market. What is the labour market? Well, the labour market you can think of as the same as any market. It's just a place where people trade things. In the labour market, people trade their ability to work for firms, and in return, firms provide them with a wage. More formally, the labour market captures the interaction between workers who supply labour and firms who demand labour to produce goods and services. So now that we know what the labour market is, we need to figure out who's in the labour market. So on the one side of the labour market, we have firms. But we're not going to talk about firms anymore today. We're going to put them to one side and we're going to focus on the other side of the labour market, which is the workers. So to figure out who is in the labour market, we're going to start with this idea of the working age population. And this is you can think of as the pool of potential participants in the labour market. So the working age population is anybody in the economy aged between 15 and 65 years old. So next, we're going to take the working age population and we're going to split it up into two groups: the labour force, or people who are in the labour market, and not in the labour force, or people who are not in the labour market. Let's talk a little bit more about the labour force. So the labour force is made up of two groups of people. Anybody who's employed, either full or part-time, that's the first group, and also anybody who's unemployed, that's the second group. So to be employed, a person needs to be working at least 1 hour a week. Though of course most people work more hours than that. To be unemployed, a person doesn't have a job, they're not working, however they have to be actively looking for a job, and that's important. It's an important part of being unemployed. So in that sense, you can think of the labour force as the portion of the working age population that's participating in the labour market in some way, either because they have a job and they're working, or if they don't have a job, they're looking for one, they're actively looking for one. Now, the rest of the working age population are not in the labour force. Now, these are people that are of working age, but for whatever reason, they don't have a job and they're not looking for one either. And because they're not looking to work, they don't participate in the labour market. Some reasons why this might be is they could be studying, they could be looking after children, they could be retired, or there might just be some other reason that they don't want to work. So now that we know who's in and out of the labour market and also how to determine whether someone is unemployed, we have enough information to calculate the unemployment rate. So to calculate the unemployment rate, first we need to find the number of people in the labour force. We can do this by adding together the number of people that are employed and the number of people that are unemployed. In our example, we have 12.6 million people employed, 0.7 million people unemployed, and if we add these numbers together, we get a labour force of 13.3 million. Now we can calculate the unemployment rate, which is just the number of people that are unemployed divided by the labour force. Plugging the numbers into our example, we get an unemployment rate of 5.3%. Right, so now we know the share of the labour market that is unemployed. Let's have a closer look at these unemployed individuals and classify them based on the different reasons why they might be unemployed. So there's a few different reasons why someone might be unemployed. I'm only going to cover a few of them in detail in this video, and the rest you can find explanations on in the explainer I mentioned at the beginning of the video. I've left a link for this at the end. So the three types of unemployment I want to talk a bit more about are cyclical unemployment, structural unemployment, and underemployment. Let's start with cyclical unemployment. So cyclical unemployment captures people that become unemployed because of changes in the state of the economy. If the economy isn't doing so well, this usually means the demand for goods and services has fallen or is growing more slowly than it did before. As a result, firms might lose some of their revenues and may not be able to afford to pay all their workers. Equally, firms might just not need all of their workers for a time because they don't need to produce as many goods and services. For both of these reasons, some people will lose their job, at least temporarily until the economy recovers. Structural unemployment is a bit different. These are people that are unemployed because their skills don't match up with the jobs that are offered, or because they're located too far away from where the suitable jobs are. Structural unemployment might occur as a result of technology replacing jobs that people used to do. And it typically lasts longer than cyclical unemployment because it requires workers to retrain in new skills or to just wait until a suitable job arises. And finally, I want to talk about underemployment. So underemployment refers to people who have a job, but that want to work more than they currently are. This could be people that have a part-time job that want to work more hours. So say somebody who works 1 shift a week, they want to work 2 or 3 shifts a week. Or it could be workers that usually work full-time, but for whatever reason have had their hours reduced temporarily. So now that we're comfortable with some concepts in the labour market, let's look at some data. So this chart is called labour underutilisation rates. And basically this is a fancy way of saying that this chart shows the share of the labour market that wants to be working but isn't, either at all or they're working less than what they want to be. In the subtitle there it says heads based, and this tells us that we're looking at measures of unemployment and underemployment based on numbers of people rather than hours of work. So looking at this chart, clearly the recent data stand out. Due to COVID-19, many people have tragically lost their jobs, and this has resulted from the lockdowns that have been put in place to protect public health. Other people haven't necessarily lost their jobs, but they've had their work hours reduced, in some cases very significantly. So how do we see this reflected in the data? Well, if the people who have lost their jobs are looking for another job, then they're classified as unemployed and the unemployment rate will increase. However, some people who have lost their jobs might decide not to look for another job for a while. Maybe they don't think that they can find another job at the moment, or maybe some of the restrictions in place have made it hard for them to search for jobs in the way that they normally would. In addition, maybe some people who have lost their jobs were close to retirement and decide to just retire early. For all of these reasons, these people are not actively looking for work anymore, and as a result, they drop out of the labour force. They're no longer a part of the labour force. As a result, we don't consider them to be unemployed, and they won't show up here via an increase in the unemployment rate. What about people who haven't lost their job but have had their work hours reduced? Maybe in some cases very significantly. These people would usually work more hours and so would become underemployed. As a result, the underemployment rate increases. You can see this in the chart. The underemployment rate has increased quite significantly. So this is a large effect at the moment. Let's look at some other data. One thing that economists often like to do is to compare today with times in the past that may or may not share some similarities. For example, if we're thinking about how unemployment might evolve in response to COVID-19, we could look at other periods in history where unemployment increased. On the chart here, we have some episodes in Australian history where unemployment increased quite a lot. Of course, here and now will always have significant differences to the past, but these episodes can still provide some useful information to us. On this chart, we track how the unemployment rate changed from the time that it began to rise in each of these episodes. I want to stress that in contrast to the last chart, where we were looking at the level of the unemployment rate and the underemployment rate, here we're looking at the change in the unemployment rate. So we're looking at unemployment data in two different ways on these two charts. So let's look a little bit closer at this chart at the second panel. So before the Great Depression in 1927, the unemployment rate was around 4%. It then began to rise, and it rose and rose and rose until it reached a peak of 20% in 1932, 5 years later. This is an increase of 16 percentage points, which is what you can see on the chart there. After unemployment reached its peak, it then took quite a long time to fall back down to 4%. In fact, this didn't happen until 1941, which is 14 years after the unemployment rate had first begun to rise. This is something that you might notice for many of these past episodes. The initial increase in unemployment happened a lot more quickly than the decline did as the economy recovered. Why might this have occurred? Well, initially the increase in unemployment and also underemployment, which was on our first chart, is cyclical. This is because it's caused by an economic contraction. In the present, the economic contraction has resulted from measures taken to contain the coronavirus. Because the cyclical unemployment or underemployment is temporary, however, many of the people affected by the restrictions should regain employment or resume working their normal hours as the economy recovers. But what would happen if this new unemployment and underemployment persists? This could be because the economic downturn lasts for longer than people think, or it could happen if people just are unable to find another job quickly. Well, some people that were originally cyclically unemployed might end up becoming structurally unemployed. This could happen if firms adjust how they work to save costs, and as a result, they no longer need to employ some workers on a permanent basis. It could also happen if some businesses or industries that were already struggling to be profitable before the economic contraction close permanently. Workers with skills specific to those jobs might become structurally unemployed because their job no longer exists. Now, even if people don't become structurally unemployed, some of them might just have to wait a long time before they find another job. Now, the longer that people are unemployed, the more it might discourage them from going out to look for work again, and they might end up leaving the labour force permanently. This has big negative implications for their economic and social well-being. So those are just a couple of factors that could mean unemployment might not fall as the economy recovers as quickly as it rose, and which probably had a role to play in some of those historical episodes that we looked at. Obviously, these outcomes are very undesirable and painful for the individuals that are involved, as we have learned from past episodes of rising unemployment. So it's therefore in everyone's interest to make sure that they happen as little as possible, or ideally not at all. With this in mind, the government and the RBA have introduced some policies that can help here. So broadly, these policies fall into three different groups. The first group is policies that are aimed at minimising cyclical unemployment in the first place. And this is achieved by policies that boost aggregate demand through the economic contraction and then also through the recovery. The RBA's policy package from March and a number of the government's fiscal policy measures will help to minimise cyclical unemployment and boost aggregate demand in this way. The second set of policies help people that do become unemployed to get back to work as quickly as possible. This helps to ensure that they don't transition from cyclical unemployment into structural or long-term unemployment. These are policies that help businesses survive the downturn and keep their employees around, which will minimise the permanent loss of jobs. Now, these include policies that help get money to businesses, so extend loans or provide grants to businesses so that they can pay their staff and their bills, even if they don't have any revenue coming in. And the third set of policies are ones that help people that do become structurally unemployed to update their skills so that they can find a job doing something else. So policies that are helpful here are ones that assist people in retraining for new jobs where there's lots of demand for labour. So for example, at the moment, this could be in the healthcare sector. So that's all I wanted to talk about in this video. On this slide, I've left some links to some material on our website which is relevant to the concepts we've discussed in this video, including the explainer. See you next time.